Hello and welcome back to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's in Islamabad, where Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says Indian troops are terrorizing the people of occupied Kashmir. He was speaking at a conference on peace and development in South Asia and urged the international community to intervene in Kashmir. The Prime Minister said India is being ruled by a racist ideology based on hatred against minorities. More in this report.
Prime Minister Imran Khan reaffirmed Pakistan's firm resolve to establish peace in its neighborhood. He said the Modi regime and its xenophobic policies were the biggest threat to stability in the region, reminding the audience that the valley has been under lockdown for over 100 days. The Prime Minister compared the BJP government to the Nazi regime in Germany. He went on to say that New Delhi's actions were undermining Islamabad's efforts for peace.
What is happening in India right now is tragic. India has been taken over by a racist, an ideology which believes in racial superiority, an ideology which is built on hate, because whenever an ideology is sold, as RSS sold this ideology of Hindu superiority, it also sold the hatred.
Chinese envoy to Pakistan Yao Jing was also present at the event and said that peace in the region is linked to stability in Afghanistan.
I believe that with the co-efforts from the Afghan government, Afghan people, as well as the regional and the international countries, we are moving towards that peace, hopefully, for Afghanistan. But Afghanistan, I think, from another point of view, that we have to do, in the meantime, business and trade and the connectivity plans for around Afghanistan or within Afghanistan.
Former Afghan parliamentarian Fawzia Kufi said that Afghanistan wants a strong and peaceful future with Pakistan.
There is a national consensus to bring peace in Afghanistan because after 4 decades of war, we need to have peace. However, we need to have a peace that is owned and led by Afghans. So any steps towards peace and towards bringing prosperity for Afghanistan is appreciated.
Pakistan's Minister for Planning and Development, Khusro Bakhtiar, said the region is lagging behind due to the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan on the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. He said a forum has been established between Pakistani and Chinese investors for mutual benefit.
I think the elephant in the room is the political stability in Afghanistan. Almost 18 years of armed conflict in Afghanistan. Finally, a dialogue process has started.
In his address, Pakistan's Minister for Finance, Hafiz Sheikh, rejected propaganda against the CPEC. He added that key regional players are welcome to participate in the multi-billion-dollar project.
The CPEC is a set of projects to improve connectivity through roads and through better network of transport. At the same time, the CPEC is also a set of energy projects to try and make Pakistan self-sufficient in electricity.
Later, Pakistani officials said Islamabad's top priority is to strengthen peace in the region and partner with neighboring countries to diffuse tensions through its role as a mediator. Reporting for Indus News, Sumaira Khan, Islamabad.
The United States Congress will hold a hearing today to examine human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. In a statement, the Congressional Human Rights Commission said India's revocation of Kashmir's autonomy has raised serious concerns. It said lawmakers will review India's crackdown on freedom of expression and the detention of hundreds of politicians in the valley. Commission Chairman Tom Lantos said Congress is closely monitoring the situation. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal said the US should send a clear message to India to reconsider its policies in Kashmir. The valley has been under a curfew and communications blackout now for over 100 days. Pakistan will abide by the International Court of Justice's decision on captured Indian spy Commander Kulbhushan Jadhav. Foreign Office spokesperson Mohammed Faisal said this during a press briefing in Islamabad. Earlier this year, the ICJ rejected India's plea to acquit Jadhav and asked Pakistan to review his death sentence. More in this report.
Mohammed Faisal said Islamabad has rejected reports about an amendment to Pakistan's Army Act that would enable Jadhav to appeal his death sentence to a civilian court. He said the Indian Supreme Court's controversial decision in the Ayodhya case has jeopardized the security of mosques across India. Faisal pointed out that Muslims have used Babri Mosque as a place of worship for centuries. He said the decision failed to uphold the demands of justice and shredded the veneer of so-called secularism in India. Faisal said the Indian Supreme Court ruling has illustrated the vulnerabilities of minorities in India, particularly Muslims. He drew the attention of the international community to India's brutal suppression of the religious rights and freedoms of the Kashmiri people. Faisal said Pakistan unequivocally condemns the killings of Palestinians by Israeli forces.
The International Criminal Court has approved a request to probe Myanmar's rights violations against the Rohingya Muslims. The court said the investigation will look into crimes against humanity. Over 700,000 Rohingya have fled to neighbouring Bangladesh since a military crackdown in 2017. Last year, a UN fact-finding mission said Myanmar's military campaign was orchestrated with genocidal intent against the Rohingya. The UN mission recommended that genocide charges be brought against Myanmar's military chief Min Aung Hlaing and 5 other generals. Well, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Washington's demand for Ankara to drop its S-400 missile system purchase is not right. He was speaking in Istanbul after his visit to the United States and said Ankara wants good ties with America and Russia. He said the United States President Donald Trump gave a positive response to the address the F-35 fighter jet sale issue. More in this report. Amid tensions over Turkey's military operation in Syria and its acquisition of the S-400, the presidents of the United States and Turkey met at the White House yesterday. President Erdogan said Turkey can buy US Patriot missiles but considers Washington's condition on the Russian S-400's interference in sovereign rights. On Turkey's operation in northeastern Syria, Erdogan said Ankara is fighting Kurdish terrorists and not civilians.
First, we have to make a distinction between two things. We have no problems with the Kurds. We have problems with terrorist organizations. Some terrorists coming out of the Kurds. Which are they? What are they? The Democratic Union Party and the People's Protection Units, which are offshoots of the terrorist organizations, the PKK, also known as the Kurdistan Workers' Party.
Erdogan said Trump makes sincere efforts to solve Turkey-US problems based on mutual respect and national interests. Trump hopes the two countries will resolve their differences soon.
Turkey's acquisition of sophisticated Russian military equipment such as the S-400 creates some very serious challenges for us, and we are talking about it constantly. We talked about it today. We're talking about it in the future. Hopefully we'll be able to resolve that situation.
Erdogan's US visit is being largely seen as a positive development in relations between the two NATO allies. Well, 8 Kurdish militants have been killed in Turkish airstrikes in northern Iraq. Turkey's defense ministry said the operation was conducted on the basis of intelligence reports. Over 400 Kurdish fighters have been killed in Turkish military operations in northern Iraq since May. The PKK has been designated as a terrorist organization by Turkey, the United States and the EU. Turkey says the group is responsible for killing more than 40,000 people over the last 30 years in Turkey. Israel and Gaza have reached a ceasefire brokered by Egypt to end 2 days of heavy fighting that killed 34 Palestinians. The Al-Quds Brigade spokesman Musab al-Barim said the truce is based on a list of demands by the group. Al-Barim said Israel must stop the violence and ensure a ceasefire during Palestinian demonstrations. Israel's military responded by saying its raids only targeted the Al-Quds Brigade. In Iraq, 4 more people have been killed and 35 others wounded in clashes between protesters and police in Baghdad. Witnesses say security forces fired tear gas to disperse demonstrators in Baghdad's Khulani Square. More than 300 people have been killed since the protests against corruption and unemployment began on the 1st of October. Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi's government has ordered electoral and constitutional reforms to try to crush the unrest, but he's refused to step down. Iran's president says the US intentionally stirs up tension and conflict in the Middle East. President Hassan Rouhani was speaking at the Islamic Unity Conference in Tehran and said this year's event will focus on Palestine and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. He said senior Islamic scholars will not allow the Palestine issue to be forgotten. Iran state media reports that 350 leading clerics from 39 countries are attending the conference. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun has expressed hope that a new government will be formed in the coming days. In a tweet, he said the new government would prioritize protesters' demands. Talking to the media, Lebanon's defense minister said the country is in a dangerous situation. He said tensions in the streets and road closures have reminded people of Lebanon's civil war. The minister said security forces will not let protesters engage in violent acts. Meanwhile, Lebanon's bank staff union has announced a strike until their safety is guaranteed. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world right after this short break. Hello and welcome back. Now, Kuwait's Prime Minister Sheikh Jabbar Mubarak has submitted his cabinet's resignation to the Emir of the Gulf Arab state. Frictions between the cabinet and parliament have led to frequent reshuffles and dissolutions of parliament. On Tuesday, Kuwaiti lawmakers submitted a motion for a no-confidence vote against Interior Minister Sheikh Khalid Al-Jarrah Al-Sabah. He is a senior member of the ruling Al-Sabah family. Lawmakers question Sheikh Khalid over alleged abuses of power, but the Emir has to accept the resignation in order for it to be final. He would then request a new cabinet to be formed. Now, in Sri Lanka, an intense 6-week campaign for presidential elections has finally come to an end. The people will vote for the country's next leader on the 16th of November. The two frontrunners in Saturday's vote will be Sajath Premadasa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and they've held their final rallies in Colombo. More in this report.
Posters and leaflets jostle for attention on Sri Lanka's street walls. There is an election to fight and the end is in sight. Meanwhile, police have stepped up security across the country to head off the chance of violence on election day. 16 million Sri Lankans will cast a vote to choose a winner from 35 candidates. The main opposition candidate, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, is the brother of ex-strongman President Mahinda Rajapaksa.
I promise you all the programs in my manifesto will be carried out during my term. We will pay special attention to the national security of this country.
The ruling party candidate Sajith Premadasa is the son of the assassinated president Rana Singhe Premadasa, who was targeted by a suicide bomber in 1993.
We will further strengthen the anti-poverty program and then reintroduce my father's Janasaviya's anti-poverty program. We will provide assistance from both these programs and eradicate poverty in a short time.
This year, the country has been rocked by coordinated extremist bombings on Easter Sunday attacks which killed 269 people. However, a private poll monitor says this year's elections will be peaceful compared to the 2015 event.
In Egypt, 7 people have been killed and 16 others injured in a fire caused by an oil pipeline leak in the city of Itay al-Barud. The health ministry says the injured are being treated for severe burns. The Ministry of Petroleum says the leak was caused by a failed attempt at theft which left a hole in the pipeline leading to an oil spill. Petroleum Pipelines Company Chief Abdel Monaim Hafiz said technical teams have arrived at the scene and are working to plug the leak. Well, it's been around a month since protests erupted in Chile and they are showing no signs of slowing down. This is despite the local police's use of brutal tactics to intimidate demonstrators, including firing pellet guns that blind people. The use of these weapons first arose in occupied Kashmir, where hundreds have been robbed of their eyesight. More in this report. Chileans have continued to protest against government corruption for weeks. This is despite a brutal crackdown by local police, which is using inhumane measures against them. This includes the use of pellet guns, which can leave people permanently blind. One doctor says this is the first time he's seen these kinds of injuries.
The number of blindness cases here is tragically high, much more than other conflict zones like Hong Kong or the Yellow West in Paris or Spain or the Palestine.
The Chilean police has also fired live rounds at demonstrators multiple times since the protests started. Despite the threat of being killed or left blind, people say they will continue to come out on the streets.
The truth is, I have more anger than fear, more hate than grief, and it is against those people who are out there shooting, mutilating people, torturing them.
The Chilean police's tactics are not new. In occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Indian occupying forces have been shooting Kashmiris with pellet guns since 2010. It can be argued that if the international community had taken strong action against the practice in occupied Kashmir, this crowd control technique would not be used against Chileans today. In the heart of the disputed Western Sahara, a former garrison town has become popular with kite surfers of all nationalities. They discovered the windswept coast is perfect for the sport. More in this report.
The water is warm and the wind is constant. Groups of kite surfers sail on the water all day long in Western Sahara.
The city owes its development to the wind, water sports condition, and above all, its nature and beauty.
In the 1970s, Morocco annexed Western Sahara, a former Spanish colony, and fought a war until a ceasefire was agreed in 1991. Today, ruined forts in the dunes and still in use military buildings remind tourists of the region's history of conflict. The area is booming with an influx of visitors, adding to fishing and trade revenue.
Dakhla has experienced enormous development in 2 decades. Today we have an international airport. We have flights that connect us to Europe and to the whole world.
Tourist numbers have jumped from 25,000 in 2010 to 100,000 today.
This old Spanish colony, and they have good seafood for sure. It's a part of Morocco. We are just near to Mauritania.
But with the flow of tourists, protecting the environment has become a major concern. For many, the real threat is from plastic waste, whether it's dropped by tourists or brought by ocean currents.
Well, we'll be back with more news from the world of business and sports right after this short break. Hello and welcome back. Now in business news, the Pakistan Stock Exchange has emerged as the world's best performing financial market since October the 1st, after gaining more than 14% in 6 weeks. According to Bloomberg's World Equity Index rankings, the KSE 100 index is among the 6 best performing markets since July, providing returns on investment of over 8%. The rising trend of the KSE 100 is due to Pakistan's recent introduction of economic reforms to reduce its trade deficits. Last week, an International Monetary Fund mission said Pakistan's policies have started to bear fruit and restore economic stability. Well, for more on this story, we're joined from Stockholm by Matthias Martinsson, who's the Chief Investment Officer of Tundra Fonda. Welcome, Matthias, to Indus. So tell us what's making Pakistan such an attractive prospect for international investors.
Well, I think first of all, Pakistan shares the traditional characteristics of many young emerging markets. You have a large and young population. You have an economy that is yet very undeveloped. But the reason why we were always more intrigued by Pakistan was that you actually have a relatively well-developed equity market. You have many companies being around for 50 to 60 years. And the corporate quality in Pakistan is far better than what one would expect for a market that is so undeveloped. As I sometimes explain, is that imagine the growth potential of Africa, but with financial infrastructure. The second reason why I think Pakistan was kind of more attractive than many other emerging markets is what we call the perception arbitrage. That investors' perception of the market is far more negative than the realities on the ground.
Matthias, this is much good news, obviously, because Pakistan's economy has been struggling. But do you expect the Pakistani authorities to introduce some sort of stimulus measures to reignite the economic growth of the country?
My impression is that they will be very careful of being too early in the stimulus. So we right now expect that they will lower the discount rate only in March 2020. Possibly as early as January. So unless something unexpected happens, that is our expectations.
So what's the outlook for Pakistan's equity markets over the next few years, Matthias?
We passed the bottom in early August. We're not going to revisit that. Our impression is that the companies now, although they're still in pain, that they've seen the worst and that they see slight gradual improvements from here. And that's what I think you've seen in the equity market also recently. If we look in valuation terms, that the market needs to rise about 40% to reach its average price to book valuations of the last 10 years. So I think kind of that is the first target. But if we look from historic truths, from 1999 and 2010, the market performed more than 25% a year in US dollar terms. So I think there's reason to be optimistic. What one should keep in mind is that the pace of the rise this time around will be slower.
Matthias Martinsson, thank you for that. That's Matthias Martinsson, the Chief Investment Officer for Tundra Fonda. Now, India's inflation rate has hit a 16-month high, hot on the heels of a slowdown in economic growth. Data released by India's Ratings and Research shows that retail inflation breached the medium-term target of 4% set by the central bank. It's the first time this has happened since July 2018.
The sharp upstick in consumer inflation dampened expectations of a big cut in interest rates by the Reserve Bank of India next month. IRR chief economist says growth concerns will dominate the central bank's monetary policy review and could still prompt a rate cut in December. Earlier this week, the RBI reported that India's factory output contracted by over 4% in September to the lowest rate in 8 years. The central bank has downgraded its GDP growth forecast for 2020 to about 6% from its previous estimate of nearly 7%.
China has called on the United States to roll back punitive tariffs in a tentative trade deal. At a press briefing, Commerce Ministry spokesman Gao Feng said a tariff cut is an important condition for the agreement to end the trade war. Beijing said the removal of tariff hikes is in the interest of Chinese and American producers and consumers. Gao said if a deal is reached, the degree of the tariff cancellation should fully reflect the importance of Phase 1 of the agreement. He said both countries are holding in-depth discussions on this issue. Trump postponed a planned tariff hike of $250 billion worth of Chinese goods after announcing the Phase 1 agreement on the 12th of October. Well, US stocks have opened lower amid weak data from major economies and a downward discount from Cisco, which rekindled worries of a global slowdown. Cisco Systems shares dropped about 6% after the company's revenue fall amid declining global spending on its routers. S&P 500 indices and the Dow Jones Industrial Average have dropped fractionally. The Nasdaq Composite has traded about 0.33% lower. A prolonged US-China trade war has disrupted supply chains and hit economic growth around the world. In Europe, Frankfurt's DAX has lost 0.25%, while London's FTSE 100 index also dropped a fraction. Well, it's 18 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but don't forget, for the latest updates on all of our stories, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Thank you for watching and bye-bye.